Great, so let's do it. Uh, I'll try to keep it short because our friend Evan will be on the main stage on a few minutes. So, uh, but still, I'll be able to cover everything. Why design patterns might make you miss your deadline? First of all, my name is Rafael. I'm Chief People Officer here at the studio, and just want to chat a little bit about product focused development. And why do you think that design patterns might make you miss your deadline? First of all, best practices and design patterns were created for several reasons. Applications need to scale, and you can reuse code. This increases velocity. Components can have standard behaviors across the entire application. So this is very helpful. If you have a button, you don't want that a button have different behaviors across the entire application. It's easier to test if you apply the right design patterns and organize your code well. It can improve performance, avoid memory leaks, and other developers can easily understand what you did because they are just used to these patterns already. So there's here just a few reasons for that, but there are many others. But still, not always the best practice design patterns are the best option for solving your problem. And I say that because some people just want to apply this and make sure that they applied all the patterns on their application, but they want to do some code that's really fancy, really following the trends, and we can get something like this. It's really beautiful, right? Colorful. You can see it's a piece of art, but you can't say what this code is doing, right? You would take a lot of time to understand all these layers and all the complexity around it. So, yeah, that's what we want to avoid by blindly applying design patterns, best practices, or wherever you want to apply on your code without thinking about it first. So what very often we see happening, it's a lot of over engineering. Uh, you are creating a simple MVP and want to write fancy code, you create a lot of layers, but multi-layer architectures are not needed everywhere. We do need some layers, but still, we don't need a lot of layers to do everything. Uh, Microservices aren't a good choice for most of the applications. It's very common to see this kind of thing happening. People starting a project first version and they just want to use microservices because at some point the application will scale and we are going to need microservices. If this happens, you think about microservices. Solid is great, indeed it is, but Solid is for oriented object programming. We don't apply all the concepts for every single piece of code, but single responsibility you can apply everywhere, right? This is always great. Although you still need to know uh, how deep you want to go in details. Maybe what you perceive as a single responsibility, it might be too fine grained, and you are going too deep in details and split things too much for one application that is too simple. Uh, for example, when we are talking about single responsibility, one file doesn't need to have only one function. Otherwise, why do you need functions instead of just files, right? I mean, sometimes you can have one function and one file if it makes sense. You can argue that, okay, we can have several functions in one file, but only one function should be exposed for other files. It might make sense too, but it depends on your problem, your application, your code, your organization, the conventions your company is using and applying. So just don't follow patterns blindly. Uh, it should have only one single reason for to change from the product perspective. Like when we say that only one single reason to change, we are not saying that this is generates from the product perspective, from the feature perspective, right? When we are talking about the code itself, we might have several reasons to change one method or one piece of code, even though it has single responsibility. The logic itself, of course, and that's what single responsibility is talking about. But I don't know, you might have a lib that is uh, outdated, some code that is deprecated, an API update, or if you are talking, for example, about a scraper, the page that you are scraping changed. So all those are reasons to change uh, your code, and still it has single responsibility depending on how you build it. So if you separate too much, the concern is even harder to keep track of what's happening. You need to go here and there and all the time changing files and looking where is it. So just think about the product perspective when you are building your files and organizing your project, and it will be just easier to find what you need and keep track of what's happening. A good example for that is models. Models are always like developers never agree with how they are done. You join a project and doesn't matter how people build the models, you always say, why did they do that? I mean, sometimes you have 5 files to show a model. Sometimes you have everything on a file and then you have the same code rewritten in 10 different places. So that's a nightmare. You change a model and have to change all the others manually and keep looking where else the code is and change it again. Or you want to reuse it a lot and you have same 100 props in one model, so it's really hard to use and understand what's going on. Uh, and so you need a manual to use this thing. It's a simple model. What about clean code? I mean, it's hard to make everyone agree on some things, but if you have good conventions, an agreement with among the developers in the project, uh, you you can. I'm pretty sure that you can understand what's better for the project. Maybe if you are on a project that you have the model being used in 50 different places, you should make it one way. Maybe 1 file is fine. But if you maybe 5 files is fine to open a model because there's different things going on. It's not just a piece of just a screen that opens and closes. But if it's just an MVP that you show the model in 1 or 2 places, maybe 1 file is fine, and it's okay to rewrite the code twice. It's not the end of the world if you have some duplicated code here and there on a small application. When the application start to scale, things change, of course, and we need better structure, but still take care to group things well and make it easy to track. And reuse what shouldn't be reused. This is funny because it sometimes make a mess. Sometimes code might look the same at first, but doesn't have the same function. For example, if you export, you have to export user for CSV and you have to export admins to CSV. I mean, the export to CSV generate the CSV file itself. Okay, it's the same thing. But export users and export admin, it seems the same thing because admins usually are users, right? But when you are exporting admins, you might start thinking on other functions that you want to add there. Like I want to export the level of access or the features that they can admin or whatever. And then that's when we start to add a lot of ifs, else's, and switches and whatever, any structure to separate your code, and then the reuse start to get harder and harder and harder and harder. So you don't really reuse it anymore. You just start to create exceptions and different cases inside the same method. So it's time to split. Yeah, it's time to split, but maybe you shouldn't have created everything with the same function on the first time. And sometimes the component might look the same, but the function is different, like buttons. Gosh, uh, sometimes we want buttons have the same behavior. Sometimes we don't. uh, I worked on an application not long ago that one button had 46 props. So basically, to use a button, you need a manual. You need to spend like 1 hour identifying what flag you need to enable, what class you need to add, just to use a button. Just to write a new button would be much, much faster. But no, no, they want to reuse the same component everywhere. And that's a nightmare. That's just wrong. The interpretation of it is not right. We have a button that with different colors, different size, one with text, one with icons, one with icons and text, one aligned on the right, one aligned on the left. So try to think better on your components. And some people just create the button component itself. I mean, there's the tag HTML tag for button. So you create a component and then you just put the button component inside it. And why are you doing that? You don't need to do that because you're just reusing and you need to import more things and you are going to use the same tag. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So just keep things, I don't know, some kind of weird standard that some people like to do, and I don't really understand why. But yeah, just pay attention on that and try to think always on the product perspective, the function itself, not only the code. Sometimes the code might be tricky, like I said before. The code might look the same at first, but then if there's different functions for it, although it's the same now, maybe in 2 or 3 days it won't be the same anymore, and you need to start splitting your code or adding, or another developer will just see that and, oh, I will just put an if here, and then they put another if, and when you see, you have a lot of props inside the same component and a lot of props, and it's a nightmare to use it. And what happened with clean code? I mean, people just think about using design patterns, using talk about best practices, fancy architectures, but happened with just keep things simple, easily readable code. When you talk about clean code, and they talk about solid and dry and everything, but the main thing around clean code is keep your code readable. I mean, that's the main goal there. People need to look what you did and understand. Of course, it needs to be well done, but that's the main reason. And why do we need so many layers? Sometimes we do need them. I mean, for some applications, for complex applications, and for some specific case. But for MVP, I mean, just keep it simple. Uh, Group your components. Don't think on so many layers. It just add complexity for your application. It's the example of the model with 5 different files just to open a model. And why do we need to build everything thinking 5 years ahead, right? Oh, because we might need to scale this, we need to build it to have optimal performance. I would say for 99% of the applications, probably if it takes 200 milliseconds more to load something, doesn't make any difference for the user. And from the if you need to spend 1 2 weeks more to build it just to save 200 milliseconds, I mean, like I said, most of the case doesn't make sense. In some case, of course it does, if you are talking about telecom systems or banking systems or something like that, but are really specific real-time applications. But for most of them, it doesn't make sense. Just keep things simple. Don't think 5 years ahead when you are building your code now. Think maybe 6 months ahead, or 3 months, depending on the domain you are working on. And because most likely in 1 or 2 years, all the code that you created will have been rewritten. It might not be true every single time, but in most cases, and mainly if you are talking about small applications or first MVPs, this will be basically always true. And what about programming language? It's funny because developers like to get specialized in one specific language, and I saw this happen a lot of times. uh, I worked with some language, and then I started working on Ruby on Rails, and then I saw something like that. Okay, we have an array, we have a map element, and then we filter elements that are even, and then we compact to show just the array of even elements. Any developer can understand that. It's pretty close to spoken language, right? And then on arrays, you can simplify it a little bit and make it this way. Still, you can understand, right? I mean, a developer that never touched the Rails might not use this structure because they are not used and they don't know all the methods, but it's fine. You can understand that. And then they use if this even more optimized. I mean, the function is the same, the the processing time is the same. Why don't just write one more word or two more words and make it way more readable? Uh, if someone never worked with Rails, probably they will see this method and say, "What is this doing?" So they will have to just research and understand. Okay, they will learn something new. They will, but every single time that a developer that's not a Rails developer see this third option, they will just struggle to understand what's there. And it's if you start to think, it's not that clean, right? From the clean code perspective, that's not a good practice. And this happened in some cases that are way more complex than that, and even developers that are Rails developer but are not really senior and understand the language really deeply with the DSLs and everything else make things even harder to understand. Same thing happened with Python. I mean, anyone can understand that. You create a method that multiplies all the numbers on an array. This is pretty simple. Although you write more code, you can even simplify it a little bit. But even someone that is starting to code can understand that and understand what's happening here. And then you try to optimize and use something like lambda functions, and it just seems like a math expression, uh, and it's really hard to understand. And if you are not used to Python, you start to see x y numbers one. What's this doing? It's really hard to understand and keep track of what's happening here. Uh, so just keep it simple. Write a little bit more code. What's you take like 30 seconds more to write that, and you might save minutes, maybe hours from other people. Those are really simple examples, but are piece of code that are much more complex than that, and can make other developers' life a nightmare. So follow the idea of keep things simple and readable, clean code. That's what it is about. And talking a little bit more about best practice and design patterns, there are study cases. People identify patterns and create designs around it. It's what the name says, right? And they are easy to apply, but you shouldn't blindly do that. You should know what you are doing. Learn and understand why they were created, where they are uh, applied properly, and how. Focus on the concepts, apply the solutions that will better solve the problem. And it's a design pattern, not the best implementation. That's one of the best sentence I read about that. I mean, a design pattern is a pattern, and you need sometimes to twist it a little bit, or just ignore it to make the best use of it for your solution. I always said that a good developer know how to apply and use design patterns and the best practices, but a really great a really great developer knows when and how not to use it and make the code just beautiful and easy to understand. And there's no silver bullet. Use your brain to solve the problem. That's I would say that's the silver bullet. Solve the problem, thinking on the problem. Don't try to apply patterns or best practice to solve the problem. Focus on the problem and how to solve it, and then you can maybe fit some of the design patterns that other people can easily understand to fix it. Uh, well, It's really simple. I just want to deliver this message that keep things simple. As I said, I would like to keep it short because now everyone will be talking on the main stage, and it will be really awesome talking about BCI and human agency and the future of technology. So I hope I can see everyone there on the international stage. And that's it. That's how we do things at AE Studio. We are always hiring, and if you are a really great developer and understand these concepts and want to learn more about that and share your thoughts with us, apply and join us.